hope you enjoy. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment.
How you doing? Right here. This is me.
Dion Taras, a 26-year-old assembly line worker, videotaped his reflection in the mirror and recorded a disturbing look into the mind of a man planning to commit multiple murder in the workplace.
Depending on what I do today, I don't know if you're even going to see this tape or not. I'm sure the whole world will see this. You can kiss my ass, everybody. Every motherfucker on this planet. That's right, because I'll kill everybody if I could.
5 months earlier, Dion Taras had quit his job. He had been out of work and broke since then. Taras had been plotting to kill his supervisor and had bought a semi-automatic rifle.
I'm very seriously considering shooting John Illerman, who was my supervisor. Very, very seriously considering it. I'm dreaming about it. I got this fancy. I'm inviting everybody over and just taking y'all one by one, man, doing it. And just hanging your body parts, man. And just let you drip down on me. Oh, that almost gets me hard, man. Thinking about that. I feel blood rushing. I know that's sick. I know it's sick. You see, I understand it. I realize I'm sick. You know? But I don't want no part of anything anymore.
In his videotape, Taras reveals that his anger began in early childhood.
Why don't you tell the family what you guys did to me when I was young? You in particular. Tell them. Tell them about it all. You fucking pig. Yeah, tell them. That fucked me up big time in a lot of ways. Because kids that young shouldn't have sexual thoughts and feel things towards older people and family members. That's sick, man. You fucked me up. You fucker.
Like others who commit violence in the workplace, the homicidal rage that Dion Taras had not dealt with for years was about to erupt.
As you can see, I went out this morning. I bought the ammunition. Got my clips ready. That's reserved for me. That's for my own use right there. In the end. You know, yeah, I could put that gun in my head. But why should I, man? When I've taken so much shit from this fucking... all these people. You know, it's a little bit of payback time.
Dion Taras never made it to his former workplace. Instead of shooting his supervisor, he walked into this fast food restaurant and killed 2 innocent strangers, ultimately turning his gun on his real target, himself. The workplace is the scene of almost 1 million violent crimes every year. Although many of these crimes are committed by strangers, some of the most tragic and the most preventable are committed by coworkers. The 3 cases you are about to see give us insight into the minds of those men and women who commit violence against their fellow workers. At the end of the program, forensic psychiatrist Dr. Park Dietz, consultant to the FBI and other law enforcement agencies, will provide guidelines for the prevention of workplace violence. Richard Farley, a 38-year-old computer technician, had worked for the ESL Corporation for 9 years until the day he was abruptly fired. 2 years later, he returned to ESL. Only this time, he walked in carrying a 12-gauge semi-automatic shotgun. He blasted his way through the front entrance and started up the stairs to the second floor. He headed toward the office of coworker Laura Black, the woman he had relentlessly pursued for 4 years.
I had my door closed and I was studying. And it just seemed to be a few seconds before all of a sudden my door was thrown open and he shot. And I thought it was blanks.
Richard Farley fired twice. One of the bullets tore a hole in Laura's shoulder.
I reached in my arm. I was trying to stop the bleeding, and a piece of bone fell out. And I knew, I had to get out of there.
As police surrounded the building, ESL workers frantically ran for their lives.
There are some reporters on what's going on.
Those who escaped said that Farley had gone berserk and was shooting everybody in sight. Police officer Bruce Dudley suddenly spotted Laura Black and crawled out into the line of fire to drag her back to safety. Even though she was badly wounded, Laura had somehow managed to get out of the building alive. Those left inside ESL were not so lucky. When Officer Dudley entered the building with his video camera, he recorded the brutality of the violence that had taken place. The walls and floors were covered with blood. He found body after body of office workers who had been ruthlessly murdered. Some victims had been shot as they went about their daily routines. Others were caught, frozen in panic, as they desperately tried to run away. Some had tried to barricade themselves behind locked doors, but Farley had found them anyway. It was a merciless attack. In less than 30 minutes, Richard Farley had murdered 7 ESL co-workers and seriously wounded 4 others. When the former ESL employee gave himself up, he told police, "I'm not crazy. I know I'll die as a result of this." Richard Farley now awaits his execution on death row at San Quentin Prison. He has refused to talk about the shooting or his fixation with Laura Black until now. He is interviewed by one of the country's foremost authorities on violence in the workplace, forensic psychiatrist Dr. Park Dietz.
What do you think that Laura Black could have done to prevent the shooting?
Treated me a lot differently than she did.
You mean go out with you?
Go out with me, yeah. Yep. That would have worked.
But she didn't want to go out with you.
No, I agree. She didn't want to.
There came a time that you thought of killing yourself in front of Laura.
Yes.
Did you think of taking her with you?
I don't believe I ever thought of that. I mean, my intention was not to hurt Laura in a physical manner. Psychologically, traumatize her, make her live with the experience of having my blood and guts all over her is one thing, but to physically hurt her, that I never intended to do that.
On the surface, there was nothing about Richard Farley that made him seem like a violent person. When he was 19 years old, he joined the Navy to learn everything he could about computer programming. After he was honorably discharged, he was hired by the ESL Corporation and given a top security clearance by the Defense Department. For 9 years, he was a trusted employee, leading a quiet, stable life. But his life quickly changed when he met 22-year-old coworker Laura Black.
Within the first couple weeks, he was demanding my home telephone number and demanding to know where I lived. And one morning, we had a confrontation in my office, and again, this is only a couple weeks after I met him. He was demanding this information, telling me I have security clearances, you can trust me, you know, the government trusts me. And I, you know, almost ran out of the office and like, get away from me. So very early on, I gave him the signal that I was not interested.
I would ask her out, and then I would get smart remarks and stuff, like I wouldn't go out with you if you were the last person on earth. And I wasn't going to let her get away with that kind of behavior. So until I could ask her to go out, and she would accept in a polite manner and stuff like that, my behavior was going to continue.
Richard Farley began to follow Laura everywhere. He joined her aerobics class so he could take snapshots of her exercising. He would often spend all night outside of her home, watching and waiting, taking down license plates of nearby parked cars.
But I didn't want her to feel terror. The ground rules that I played by are basically that I want to change her behavior. I want to do things that may make her mad, that may upset her, but that won't offend her or drive her away.
I was taking classes at Santa Clara University working on a master's. He'd show up there. He'd show up at the softball games. He'd show up where we'd go out for pizza afterwards. He was everywhere. So I just would have had to been confined to my home. I thought about moving away, changing my hair color, changing my name. He had my sister's address. He got into my personnel file. He said, I know where your sister lives. Well, I have two sisters. And the thought of him going after my younger sister is horrifying. So you're stuck. He has my family's address. He threatened to come back at Christmas to Virginia and, you know, show up at the door. This person was becoming very dangerous and serious and held over me the fact that he knew where my family lived.
Tell me about the compulsion.
You know, looking back, I don't even see the compulsion anymore. But at the time, there was a definite need to do that. I mean, even though I was consciously aware of what I was doing and would try to stop when she disappeared out of my life, you know, or when she went somewhere where I didn't have any idea where she was at, then there was a definite compulsion to find out where she was at. And I couldn't even to this day describe why.
Did it occur to you to pursue a relationship with someone who wouldn't be so adversarial?
I was doing that at the same time. It was like two personalities, one that dealt with Laura and one that dealt with the rest of the world. And the rest of the world, I met a girl, a little Chinese girl that I found very attractive, and we had a lot in common. So I had a girlfriend as well as pursued Laura.
Were you considering marriage with your girlfriend?
Yes.
And that relationship was at the same time that you were pursuing Laura Black, is that right?
Yes, it was. As I say, while I was with May, we had one relationship, and then when she left, like a whole different person came out, and I had a different type of relationship with Laura.
Despite his engagement, Farley's fixation with Laura Black continued. After repeated warnings, ESL, believing nothing more could be done to stop the harassment, decided to fire him.
You said in one of your letters that once you were fired, Laura wouldn't be able to control you anymore.
That's right.
And the company wouldn't either, would they?
That's right. They held the loss of my job over my head as long as I worked there. Once I lost the job, they don't have that anymore. There's nothing that Laura can say, well, if you stop bothering me, then I won't, or then you'll lose your job and you won't be able to do this and that and so forth. Once I lost my job, they lost the ability to control me or have any control over what I did.
Fearing for her life, Laura got a temporary restraining order from the Superior Court of California, which stated that Farley could not telephone, follow, or threaten her. It also warned him to stay at least 300 yards from her home or place of business. But Richard Farley had his own warning for Laura Black. He wrote, "I once told you that I will do whatever is necessary to see you. I'm not fully sure how far I'm willing to go. Don't make me find out."
There's quotes from the letters, I might run amok. I don't know what I'm capable of doing. And given his persistence and the perception that he was just throwing his life away, I took him very seriously. And I felt like this paper document that we were going to somehow to agree to in court was absolutely worthless.
One day before he was to appear in court, Richard Farley rented a van and loaded it with 98 pounds of guns and ammunition. He then returned home for the last time and said goodbye to his fiancée, May Chang.
You'd made love to May that morning.
That afternoon.
You made love to her that afternoon and drove over?
Right. Actually, I don't think I made love to her as more as I just used her at that point. She was there in a, seductive type position, so I just availed myself of her basically, and then got in my vehicle and drove off. Yeah. I felt hopelessness, and also this is just something that has to be done. It's a weird feeling. It's you're going along, you can't believe that you're doing this. It's almost like a compulsion where you're sitting outside, just kind of watching yourself progress towards something that you know is going to happen.
Building at 1345 Crossman Avenue.
A 40-year-old gunman is in custody after a standoff that left 7 people dead and 4 wounded. Police in Sunnyvale, California have apprehended a computer technician.
It's one thing for him to have inflicted, pain and suffering on me, but to take the lives of these innocent people and shoot some of them in the back. If I could undo the damage that this man has done, I would give anything to do that.
Wanda Rogers, a 43-year-old social worker, had always taken pride in her work. But after 6 years on the job, she was suddenly fired. 1 year later, on February 2nd, 1993, Wanda returned to her former workplace, this time disguised in a black wig and carrying a double-action revolver.
One morning I got up, made a few phone calls, loaded the gun, got in my car, and drove to Santa Fe Springs. I was on medication. I took quite a bit because I had intended to shoot someone. I knew the routine, I knew the back steps, and of course I knew where Two's office was. And I passed the other 2 offices. There was no one inside. And when I reached Two's office, I pointed the gun at him and his head was down. And I think he heard a click or something, and his head went up and it startled me, and I shot.
Wanda had shot her former supervisor, Tu Nguyen, between the eyes at point-blank range. Although critically wounded, Tu Nguyen survived. Wanda was found guilty of attempted murder. At her sentencing, the judge said, "I shudder when I think back to the manner in which you attempted to kill the victim in this case. It was a cruel and vicious shooting." The judge condemned Wanda to spend the rest of her life in prison. Wanda Rogers seemed like the last person on earth who could commit murder. She was a child social worker with a master's degree in counseling and happily married with 2 children of her own. But in 1991, Wanda went to work for the Department of Children's Services Agency in Santa Fe Springs, California, and began to experience bouts of anxiety and depression. Her marriage had fallen apart, and she felt her work had become increasingly difficult. She began to have confrontations with her supervisors.
She became very nervous, prone to tears, frustrated. Wanda's primary complaint was that management is mistreating me. Management has no compassion for me. Management is doing things to me. Those are the kinds of things that she said to me. Wanda felt that she was on a fast track out the door.
After only 4 months at her new assignment, Wanda Rogers was fired for what management called a lack of respect for authority. Dr. Park Dietz interviewed Wanda Rogers at the women's prison at Chowchilla, California.
So you were fired on the 14th, on Valentine's Day?
Yes.
And you hadn't expected when you went in that morning?
No.
How did you take being fired?
I didn't take it well. I didn't deserve it. I had worked hard. I hadn't done anything so damaging. I refused to do anything that would create such hardship that I should be fired. Maybe reprimanded, but fired. That was my whole livelihood. That was my life. The children were. I cared more about the children than I did the logging of information, the keeping of records. That wasn't important to me. The children were. I did the record keeping and the logging and so on, but I didn't make it a priority. And that fell short of their expectation.
After Wanda was fired, she had no money for consistent psychiatric treatment or medication. She lost custody of her children, and her mental condition deteriorated. She began to withdraw into her own world.
How would you spend your time?
In my room upstairs, watching TV, or nothing, just laying there.
Any favorite things that you watched?
The typical, like, Bruce Willis movies. Die Hard 2. I watch them over and over.
Films in which a hero takes action?
Yes.
And saves the weak from the evil?
Yes.
As the year passed, Wanda sank deeper and deeper into her depression.
It was a nightmare. It was a whole horrendous year of trying to even pay bills. I wasn't able to work. I tried, but I got lost going to this one job, and it was Meals on Wheels. I was going to do volunteer work. And I headed over to the hospital, and I couldn't find it, and I got there like 30 minutes late, and I thought, oh, I'm too disoriented. I couldn't do that, even a volunteer job, so I went home. I knew I wasn't capable of working.
Wanda wrote, "I am greatly immobilized. I fear that I am losing my mind, and I do not want to put other people's lives in jeopardy. I remain out of the stream of life. My thinking has become obsessive." Wanda was haunted by memories of a tragic childhood, growing up with a mother who, like Wanda, had severe mental illness and who committed suicide at the age of 39. Out of work for a year, Wanda appealed for workers' compensation, but her claim was ignored.
Do you remember writing to the governor?
Yes.
And the mayor?
Yes.
A senator?
Yes.
The Board of Supervisors?
Yes.
The Department of Industrial Relations?
Yes.
Did any of them help you?
No.
Not many even wrote back, did they?
No.
In the course of all this, did anyone suggest that you apply for Social Security disability income?
No.
That idea never came up?
Mm-mm.
Did you see options open to you?
No. I thought I was just a loser, and I was continuing to lose.
Now, by this time, you'd lost your marriage and your children.
Yes.
And your job.
Yes.
Your career was disappearing.
Yes.
Wanda wrote, "I feel anger at my incompetent superiors at work. I have thoughts of homicide, that I should have taken matters into my own hands." 3 months after Wanda was fired, she bought a gun and started to make regular trips to the Ontario shooting range.
I picked a good gun, one that I could learn to shoot on. .38 Special.
Do you know what kind of gun your mother had used when she committed suicide?
It was a .38.
You chose the same kind?
Yes.
Did you ever hold that gun to your own head?
I may have.
And what did you end up doing with it?
With the gun. I took someone else's life. Or I attempted to take someone else's life.
Why would you say you shot him?
I believe what I did was used too in my replacement. If I had it to do over again, I wouldn't shoot two. I would shoot myself. So he was my replacement.
This was a substitute for suicide.
Yes.
He was your stand-in.
Yes.
Give her whole life, look with kindness upon the Father.
32-year-old Sandy Brandstatter had been married for 5 years when she had her first child, a boy she named after her husband, Mark. Sandy was living the American dream, a loving family, and a good job. Life was turning out just the way she had always hoped. But on the morning of May 6, 1993, all that would change. At 8:30 a.m., Sandy came to work at the Dearborn post office, just as she had done for the last 7 years. A few minutes later, a coworker, Larry Jason, walked into the post office carrying a .38 caliber revolver and a Derringer.
I just saw the gun pointed at my face, and the only thing I could think of was my husband and the baby. I did not want to die.
What happened that day left Sandy Brandstatter with lifetime injuries to her speech and hearing, but she lived to tell her story. Larry Jason and Sandy Brandstatter both worked at the same post office in Dearborn, Michigan. After having worked there only 7 years, Sandy was promoted to the job of administrative clerk. To Larry Jason, who had worked there 26 years, this was just another slap in the face from management. He felt he not only deserved the job, but he had been passed over for a woman.
I just believed that Larry didn't want me in the job. And so he was bound and determined to get me out of there. And the way he thought he could get me out of there was to take my job. And he had hired a private investigator to watch me and to watch my boss. He must have told the investigator something, maybe that we were having an affair or something, you know, and that's what he was trying to find out, you know. I mean, he was like grasping at straws, anything.
In December of 1992, Larry Jason filed a sex discrimination complaint against Sandy Brandstatter. Sandy was afraid of what Jason would do if he lost his case. She wrote the Dearborn postmaster, "I'm afraid if it doesn't go his way, that it could push him over the edge. I wanted to let the proper people know of my concern if anything was to happen. I cannot express to you how concerned I am." In response to Sandy's letter, postal authorities investigated and decided Jason was not a real threat. But Sandy was not the only co-worker at Dearborn who was intimidated by Larry Jason.
He had this way of staring at people. He just look you right in the eye and just as mean as he could give you this stare. It looked like he wanted to kill you.
2 weeks prior to the shooting, it was on a Thursday, he sat down not only at the same table as I did, but right across from me. And he always had this reputation of reading some books that were just kind of eerie to begin with. And when he sat down and he picked this book up in front of me, Men Who Love to Murder Women, I was like, I couldn't eat. I mean, the guy scared me. I couldn't eat. I just quietly got up and walked out as fast as I could.
Bob Frizz was Larry Jason's former supervisor.
We had to work next to each other every day. And if he was reprimanded or he would just come out and say, well, if you fire me, I'm going to kill you.
Like Sandy, Bob Frizz had also written a letter to the Dearborn postmaster expressing his fear of Larry Jason.
They would say that, oh, just you and Larry can't get along. I says, well, I'm here to do my job. He's the one that's coming in threatening me every day. And after a while, he did it so much and so often that they just kind of brushed it off as he's just talking. And he's not really going to do anything.
Frizz became so frightened of Larry Jason that he quit his job and left the post office. On February 26, 1993, Larry Jason's sex discrimination suit against Sandy Brandstatter went to trial.
He didn't like what we had to say, and he just sat there and he just stared at us with a mean look, you know. And once the decision came down that he lost that part of it too, the EO charge, I knew something was going to happen. I had taken out our life insurance policy at work. I had just like the basic, maybe an extra $10,000 or whatever. But Gary and I both were really afraid, and I maxed it out a couple months before. I just didn't know what he was going to do. I really didn't. I was really afraid. Really afraid.
On May 8th, 1 month after he lost his case to Sandy Brandstatter, Larry Jason drove into the parking lot of the Dearborn post office.
I always tried to watch him in the morning, and one of the things he did in the morning was carry cups of coffee in a container. You could see each cup of coffee. And I used to make sure when he came in the morning that he was carrying that.
We did watch every day. We watched Larry Jason every morning come into work. We'd make it a point of taking a coffee break at that time, and going up to the upstairs swing room to watch what Larry brought in. Because we had this feeling if Larry ever came in with anything other than the tray of 5 coffees, then there was trouble. We were going to get everybody out of the garage and investigate it before we went any further.
That particular day I was speaking to mechanic Gary, and I had glanced up and saw the back of Larry walking by the windows, but didn't see what he was carrying or anything. And I was distracted, and he got by me.
I was in the process of starting to staple a card to a catalog when I heard this pop, pop, pop. And at first it didn't sink in to what it was, but then I realized it was gunfire, and I think I yelled out, Sandy, what's going on? I was up underneath the desk, and there was like 6 to 10 rounds that came into the side of the desk. He hit me once between the shoulder blade and spine, and also hit me at the lower part of my shoulder blade, which came out over on this side here. So he actually hit me 5 times, and he shot at me like 15 to 20 times.
He had come around in through the hallway, and that door doesn't have a window on it. It's just a solid door. Just flung open the door and called my name, just said Sandy. And I was standing at my desk, and Gary was on the other side of my desk. And I just saw the gun pointed at my face, and he shot. And I must have had a chance to move a little bit because I know he was aiming for right between my eyes. And he shot me here instead. And I went down like a domino. And the only thing I could think of was my husband and the baby. I did not want to die. And I heard another gunshot, and he had shot Gary. And I was still moaning, trying to keep myself awake. And he must have heard me and came up from behind, and I felt the other shot to the back of my head. And that's all I really remember. And he shot me one more time.
And the VMF employees came in and were shouting that shots were fired and Sandy was shot and Gary was dead. And I said, oh, no, I just talked to Sandy 5 minutes ago. She can't be shot. She can't be shot. And right then I knew why, and I knew who.
Once inside the building, police found the bodies of Gary Montez and the shooter, Larry Jason. Jason, lying in the back of a storeroom, had taken his own life.
Upon arriving at Larry Jason's home, we found that all of the doors and windows were secured. The home had been turned into a veritable fortress. Inside the home, we found many weapons, handguns, long guns, assault weapons, knives, tear gas. It's certainly fortunate that Larry Jason was not able to make a stand in his home because it would have been a horrible battle.
After months in the hospital and 5 operations, Sandy Brandstatter returned home to her family. She had miraculously survived critical injuries. 3 bullets in the head and back, resulting in severe, permanent nerve damage.
If the postal inspection had gone in and, interviewed some of the other employees, some of the other coworkers, they would have found out it wasn't just a complaint that I had. There was a complaint that other people had, and there was definitely a problem here. And then after speaking to other employees and really getting a sense of how we felt and how afraid we were, that they could have probably done something with Larry. You know, maybe to even diffuse him a little bit, if you will, you know. They didn't handle it right. I really can't say in my heart they handled it right. They could have done something about it. I thought by writing the letter I was doing something positive, that something good was going to come out of this. But it didn't work out that way.
The workplace is too often the scene of avoidable tragedy. We have a 1 in 4 chance of being assaulted, threatened, or harassed on the job. We don't go to work each day expecting trouble from our coworkers, yet the toll of death and injury continues to mount.
Whenever an individual shows any warning signs, or indeed any time that someone is made to feel afraid at work, the worst thing to do is to ignore it. Instead, what should be done is to report this behavior to a supervisor, and if that doesn't bring results, report it even higher. The most obvious warning sign of violence in the workplace is making threats or comments about violence or weapons. Threats are never just talk. They are always an expression of something that's wrong with the situation and or the person making the threat. And to ignore them is to court disaster. Another warning sign of violence in the workplace is a kind of behavior that's inappropriate at work. Angry behavior, being gloomy, sullen all of the time, blaming other people, having temper tantrums, acting in an insubordinate manner, or intimidating gestures or behavior. Another warning sign is fascination with the police, military, survivalism, spying, or violent movies, television, and magazines. I always tell them to look for weapons of all kinds, particularly hoarding weapons and ammunition for all of the enemies that they imagine may descend upon them, and for signs of social withdrawal. The curtains tightly drawn or the windows boarded up, and nothing to indicate that the person tends to socialize or have friends over. Another warning sign is pathological fixation on another individual. This was true in the case of Richard Farley with his fixation on Laura Black, and also true of Larry Jason with his fixation on Sandy Branstetter. Another warning sign is depression. Millions of people in the workplace are capable of developing the depressive illness that Wanda Rogers exhibited. It afflicts about 10% of Americans. And so any workplace can have a situation develop in which an employee seems overwhelmed at work, is breaking down crying on the job, and needs assistance. This is not a rare problem. We've known for a long time that paranoia tends to increase the risk of violence, and increasingly we learn that depression may increase the risk not just of suicide, but also of violence to others. It's that mixture together that plays the greatest role in multiple victim attacks in the workplace, and that always ought to get the attention of those who hear about it. And that's because individuals who are depressed and paranoid may attribute their misfortune, which is severe in their eyes, to the actions of others, and may attack those others in retaliation for it. Just because an individual shows one or more of these warning signs does not mean that the individual is going to be violent. It does mean that there's a problem that needs attention. These cases are not really about evil. They are about sickness and despair, and about failures of individuals to seek treatment, failure of their friends and families and employers to move them toward a solution to their dilemmas. But the first order of business is to treat troubled people fairly, well, with respect for their dignity, and provide for them the treatment that they need to prevent the violence.